Briefly introduce our esteemed guest. We have Charles Gerena, who is a creative communicator and an EV evangelist. And he is also the lead organizer with Drive Electric RVA. And we want to thank Charles so much for spending his evening with us and talking to us about all things electric vehicles, which I know personally I'm very excited to learn more. I'm very interested in EVs and excited to hear what he has to say. So Charles, feel free to introduce yourself more in detail and take it away.
Sure, thanks. I appreciate that introduction. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Share. All right. So I'm making an assumption that that most folks here know kind of like the basics of electric vehicle technology and that sort of thing. So I'm going to focus more on kind of the state of EVs today in Virginia, and where we're heading in the near term. I'll put the caveat that I'm not a market research expert and any stretch of the imagination. I'm an EV advocate, but these just sort of represent my opinions or perspectives on kind of where things are at, so you could take that with a grain of salt. So let me advance here. So a little bit about my story. I actually have solar in my house that I got from the Virginia Sun Co-op that was in Richmond a number of years ago. So that's been 6 years since I went solar, and you actually can see in the corner of the street right beside my house a white car. That's a Nissan Leaf. So I actually have an electric vehicle as well, and I currently have a Chevy Bolt. But both cars I've charged right off my solar panels, and so it's been great to take advantage of the opportunity to have a clean fuel for my car that is free essentially. And then the picture there is at an event. We're a Drive Electric RVA, and we do advocacy and outreach and education throughout the year to promote electric vehicles as a fun, practical transportation alternative that also has a positive impact on climate change and on air pollution. So that's a little bit more about me and our group. So EVs are a niche that keeps on growing. I'll be the first to admit that EVs are a small segment of the overall automobile market. However, that niche has been consistent, with some exceptions, as you can see in this chart of light-duty electric vehicle sales, and that includes both all-electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. We had a little bit of a drop-off in 2019, 2020, and then 2021, last year, it just took off like a rocket. I will say that most of that, the 607,000 EVs that were sold that year were Tesla. There are other manufacturers of EVs currently, but they by far dominate the market today. And there was a big reason why there was a huge jump, the introduction of the Model Y and the continued sales of the Model 3. But over the course of the last 10 years, you can see there's been a fairly consistent growth in this niche for electric vehicles. And I would argue that niche has become more diverse. So now in today's market, you've got, your small cars, like I mentioned, a Nissan Leaf, and here's a Fiat 500, which is actually a new iteration of the Fiat 500 that's all electric. To sedans, to minivans, like the ID Buzz, to trucks, like the Silverado from Chevy. You probably heard a lot about the F-150 Lightning and about Rivian. And by the way, these pictures I got from the New York Auto Show that took place a couple of weeks ago. And what was amazing about that show was there was a whole portion of almost an entire floor just devoted to electric vehicles. And then in the main show floor, every manufacturer had either a plug-in hybrid or an all-electric vehicle, and some of them were very prominently displayed. So, again, while EVs are a niche, not only does that niche continue to grow, but now it's become more diverse. And we are going to see more types of EVs in the market as the battery technology evolves, and it can allows manufacturers to make cars that have different configurations to them while keeping the price affordable. So the question is, are we going to see these cars in Virginia? The good news is that last year, we joined with all the other states that you see in this graphic to be a clean car standard state. And I won't get too much into the nuances of what that means, but essentially, we all these states follow the clean car standards that California established for itself. Typically, states that are among the clean car standard states are the ones that will tend to get EVs first from manufacturers, since in those particular states they're required. There's various requirements in place to either have zero emission vehicles, a certain percentage of those being sold, and then of those zero emission vehicles, there's also standards in terms of like other kinds of standards as well. So so there's an incentive in a sense for the auto dealers to have the stock. And so what you hear very often from people in Virginia is that for the longest time, if they wanted a certain kind of EV, they had to go to Maryland, because Maryland is one of the clean car standard states. But now Virginia has joined, and starting in 2025, that model year, we'll start to see the similar standards. And actually, California is in the process of considering tightening those standards, which would mean all the states would tighten their standards together. So hopefully this will mean that we'll see more of these cars in Virginia because of the clean car standards that are in place. The other thing that I would point out that's encouraging is that the Virginia Auto Dealers Association has really stepped forward, I think, in terms of taking EVs seriously. And so they've done various things to promote them. They actually purchased an ID4 or got an ID4 from Volkswagen and branded it to talk about how great electric vehicles are. And they had them at various events, including some of the events that we do during the course of the year. Excuse me. So I think I'm encouraged by both of these things. The fact that there's a policy lever, but also there's a market lever as well, that the auto dealers recognize that EVs are a growing niche. There are people who want to drive them and want to buy them, and so there's an opportunity for them to make some money. And so I think we really need both. You can't necessarily rely on policy if the market doesn't care, and if the auto dealers could have made the argument, well, we could try to meet demand, but we just don't get the cars from the automakers because we're not one of the clean car standard states. So they kind of have to both go together. So what are we going to need to do that? So assuming that we do well and get more people into EVs, obviously you're going to need some place to fuel them. And that includes level 1, level 2, so 120 volts and 240 volts, and also DC fast DC fast charging. So all those are going to be required depending on the situation. Obviously to support interstate travel, the DC fast charging fills that niche, and in terms of those people who may not be able to install a charger at their house, that they may have to rely on DC fast charging, but also being able to have people be able to install charging at their house, a level 1 or level 2, and then being able to find some additional options in places like libraries and movie theaters. And some would argue that the way that we're going to be fueling our electric vehicles is going to be a little bit different paradigm than gasoline cars. We're used to finding the nearest gas station on the corner somewhere, and then pulling in, filling up the car in 10-15 minutes while you go to the store and get something to eat, and then you leave. because of the nature of EV charging, even the fastest charging takes a little while on a DC fast charger. And so thinking about maybe there's the different ways to meet the demand, like perhaps having like lots of level 2 or even level 1 chargers everywhere. And so that basically you just sort of top off wherever you needed to, as opposed to pulling into a station intentionally and then refueling your car all the way to the top. So it depends on who you talk to, and there's different perspectives on that. The other good news is that there's lots of money being spent in charging infrastructure in Virginia, including private companies like ChargePoint, Volta, EVgo, as you see pictured here, Tesla with its supercharger network. The state is actually spending $14 million from the Volkswagen settlement money that is received to build a statewide network of chargers. And then the state is also getting about another $16 million from the federal infrastructure bill. So there's lots of money that's already been spent, and there's more money that's coming for infrastructure charges, which is, so that's all very encouraging, I think, in terms of supporting this future demand. But these investments, I would argue, need to be equitable. And what do I mean by equitable? Well, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. You could say, I say equity and also maximizing their impact. For example, low and moderate income communities have tended to get underinvested in charging infrastructure, mainly because of the relationship between retail and charging. A lot, like for example, Electrify America has stated publicly, one of the criteria they look for in putting in a charging station somewhere is, are there amenities nearby? Is there retail nearby? There's a density of activity, so to speak. But there are some communities that are under retailed, have been under retailed for years. And so they're less likely to get this private investment. And so, looking forward, there's an opportunity for the state government, both the network that it's building and also the money it's going to be receiving from the infrastructure bill, to really fill in the gaps, not just put another set of charging stations in Richmond. I live in Richmond. I don't mind. It may seem weird. I wouldn't want more installed in Richmond, but there's plenty of other communities in the state that don't have hardly any infrastructure at all. And there's even some parts of Richmond that don't have much infrastructure at all. So, but that's not going to happen by itself. It's being intentional about what communities are going to be left out because of historic underinvestment, and where are there opportunities to fill those gaps in with some of this public money. Okay. One of the things that Driver Electric RVA has been working on to do its part to protect access to charging infrastructure is by working with the state lawmakers to pass a bill this session. It's basically called anti-icing. Bill, you might have heard that term before. Where a gas car parks at a charging station, obviously no intention of using it. For whatever reason, they could just be a mistake. They don't realize it's a charger. They may be a little bit spiteful. You might have read anecdotally about tractor trailers that intentionally will park right across a bunch of superchargers just to be spiteful. So, so in order to really be looking forward, because as we're again expecting people to buy EVs, we want them to be able to get access to the charging infrastructure that private industry is investing in, public industry is investing in. I've had some dealing with some allergies and stuff like that. So, so we working with a couple of local lawmakers, we had this bill crafted, and it was signed by the governor. So this is the law that basically, if you park your car with no intention of charging, you'll get fined $25 for that. Also, if you have an EV and it's parked at a charger and it's stopped charging, then you also get a $25 fine as well. And that's to prevent two things are happening. One is EV owners that will sometimes treat a charging station as their own sort of personal parking, if you will. when it's not. It's there for a specific purpose to refuel your car. Oh, and also those people who they have plugged their car in, it's done charging, and they don't really pay attention to. They'll just basically leave the car there all day and deprive somebody else the opportunity of using that infrastructure. So, so that's why the fine applies both to gas car owners as well as to EV owners as well. We'll be working on this. The main thing we're going to really work on this is education, because part of the bill says there has to be a sign that says penalty up to $25, and the spot itself has to be clearly marked for charging. And that's not always the case. So we're going to be spending a lot of time this coming year approaching some of the larger infrastructure companies, local businesses, to make sure that they're aware of this law and they put the proper signage in place so that basically it helps them, because if they have an issue with somebody a spot being blocked, they actually have some recourse by. And I will also add that although the bill itself does not include a provision for towing the vehicle, technically the Virginia code allows for towing of cars if they're in violation of a parking ordinance. And so since this is a new parking ordinance, theoretically, somebody could have the car towed. Although, from practice, you might be aware, that's local businesses don't usually do that. So one of the things we are going to be working on is potentially adding a towing provision into this bill next year. So, but the fact that we have this bill to protect access, I think, is a big step forward. Okay. So last thing I'll end on is some other helpful policies. Ben mentioned the rebate program. Virginia is good news and bad news. Good news is that we have a point of sale rebate, which means it's not a credit against your taxes. And so if you don't pay taxes, you don't get any benefit. It's an actual cash on the hood refund, if you will, on part of what you're paying for the vehicle. It applies to both new and used cars. And if you have a lower income, I forget what the threshold is, you get an enhanced rebate. So you get an additional money off. So it's probably one of the more progressive rebate programs in the country. The bad news is that there's no money in it. The bill was passed last year without any funding. The budget was included. There was like $10 billion included in the budget this year, and it was taken out. So during this period of time when the state lawmakers are looking at the budget, I would strongly encourage you to approach your local lawmaker, your local representative, and say, hey, I'm an advocate of electric vehicles. I want to help other people be able to afford this technology, which will also help them in the long run in terms of lower total cost of ownership, improving the air quality in their communities. Please put somebody into the budget for the rebate program. Fleet electrification, there was a bill passed basically to requires the state to look at total cost of ownership when considering fleet purchases. And if that total cost of ownership of an EV turns out to be cheaper than a gas-powered equivalent, the state shall, it's not necessarily required, but it encourages the state to make that purchase of the electric version as opposed to the non-electric version. The last policy I mentioned is a highway use fee, which basically anybody who owns either an electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid, or hybrid, so basically any fuel-efficient cars have to pay an additional fee. The logic being that, well, we're not paying our fair share in terms of we use gasoline, or we use a lot less of it. And so that's less revenue that goes into like repairing the roads and things like that. Of course, the thing that I think some people forget is that we use electricity. Electricity is taxed. The vehicle itself, because EVs tend to be a little bit more expensive, the personal property taxes are a little higher. So I would argue it's not fair to single out this technology for a special fee, especially if we're trying to encourage people to use it. We have a rebate program with fleet electrification. We're doing other things, investing millions in infrastructure, and yet we're going to impose an additional fee on people. So VMT, vehicle miles traveled, would be better fair to everybody, actually, because it would be based basically on how much you drive as opposed to what you're driving. Well, I think that's about all I've got. So here's our email address if you have any questions about anything that I covered. And I apologize if I went a little bit over, but I think that's all I've got on my presentation. So thank you for your time.
All right, thanks, Charles. I think we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. First thing I was going to do, I saw somebody noted that several members of the Virginia General Assembly are EV owners. That's true. There's actually a bipartisan EV caucus made up of Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate. I know a few years ago or last year when they met at the Science Museum, during the early days of the pandemic, there was a funny joking argument over who was going to get access to the EV chargers in front of the Science Museum of Virginia here in Richmond. So, but yes, folks, EV owners, especially I think in Northern Virginia and in the Hampton Roads, and here in Richmond, especially in the General Assembly. So with that, I'll turn it over again if there's questions. I guess I see one from William. Charles, is, who enforces the law? I assume we're talking about the parking, the parking restrictions. Who enforces these laws? Is it you mentioned the business has to call it in, or is the police are coming around and checking, or?
Yeah, that is a really good question. So the original version of the bill that we submitted actually specified, said specifically, it was the responsibility of the property owner. So there's whoever owns the charging station, it falls on them to do it. Unfortunately, that part was taken out of the bill, so it's it's open. So, which is unfortunate because then it's not clear. Well, whose responsibility is it, so to speak? So yes, the answer is yes. The property owner could call the police and have the fine imposed on that individual, or even have the car towed if they so wanted to, or they don't. And also, yes, the answer is yes. A police officer could be doing his patrols and in a community and say, "Oh, whoa, look, there's a car there. It's not supposed to be parked where that spotted," and write a ticket for $25. So. So the answer is yes to all of that, but it's not defined who takes responsibility. That is to me a little bit of a concern, because who do we go to like hold people accountable to make sure this gets enforced properly? Good question.
I see, John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, if I could jump in just a little bit. I've been with Drive Electric RV. Charles is definitely the founder and organizer. He runs the thing, but I've been there since the beginning for 8 years. And I just had a couple of things that I would like that people may know, but let me just emphasize this. 5 or maybe 6 years ago, there were 0 cars, EVs, under $70,000 that you could drive 200 miles. I have lost track of how many there are now. But the thing about the market right now with the supply chain, with our weird world, there are lots of EVs that are really cool looking that are on the way, or that exist someplace, but you can't get them. You can't go to the Chevy dealer and get a Tesla. You order one and it's going to be months. So what a lot of EV advocates are saying is, if people are looking for a car, hang on to your one. Just don't buy a gas car. Don't buy a gas car. Put it off. There's a lot of choices that are on the way. The pickup trucks are on the way. The little Equinox from Chevy, I'm very excited about. And I have to always put in the plug for plug-in hybrids, where people aren't ready to go all electric. I've driven Volts for over 10 years, and the way they work is you drive electric all the time around town, never use any gas. But if you want to go on a trip, you go on a trip. If I wanted to get out and drive to California right now, I could go drive to California and I wouldn't have to charge. So those are plug-in hybrids. So there's a number of those on the market as well. But I just wanted to put in a little bit of information about the market right now. Is not really good, but it looks like it's going to be great in a year. That's it.
Great. I see William has his hand up. Thanks, John.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for holding this. I thought in Japan, they actually had cars that had solar panels that assisted the power of the vehicles. And you had to get a special import license to bring them into the States. What's the status of solar panels as part of the car itself?
I have one on order.
Oh, really?
It's not Japanese. No, the one I'm talking about is Aptera is developing one. They're a startup. Whether they make them or not, who knows? But the problem is you can't make enough electricity to really have it be useful for the amount of energy you need to drive a car. So if you put it onto a typical Tesla, you could cover it with solar and you get about 10 miles a day of range. There's just not enough production in the area. So there's a Lightspeed, a European model that's being developed that's going to cost over $100,000. But the Aptera is this weird little three-wheel guy that I hope to drive in a couple of years. But yep, Aptera, look that up. You will enjoy just looking at the way they look. APTERA, the apt era for that. That's how I think about it.
Right.
I'm unfamiliar with one from Japan, and I do look at that sort of information quite a lot. I haven't seen that.
Thanks, John. And Carolyn put a question in the chat. What steps are being taken to ensure rural areas will have access to charging infrastructure? Carolyn lives in the county that's rural. The majority of individuals commute about 30 miles to work. There's very little charging infrastructure, a few Tesla chargers.
Yes, that was when I was talking about equitable investment. That's definitely very high up on the list in terms of getting more funds to rural electrification. There actually was an effort to encourage rural charging infrastructure investments. The General Assembly, there was actually an effort to create a fund in order to put some money towards that. There's also another bill that would have been putting it towards like sort of touristy areas, if you will. So like for those rural areas that have a sort of a nascent tourism industry, that there would be some money available for that. Unfortunately, neither bill passed. No big surprise there. So I definitely think that should be a very high priority in terms of installing. The other thing I'll point out too is that in today's market, the ranges of electric vehicles have definitely gone up, whereas the cost has either stayed the same or gone a little bit down because of the advances in the battery technology. What does that mean? It means that whereas like let's say maybe longer than maybe 8 years ago, when I first bought my first EV, Nissan Leaf, it only went 85 miles with a charge. It'd be very hard to use a car like that in a rural community, because of the distances between different places. Today, I have a Chevy Bolt that goes 259 miles on a full charge. So depending on what your habits are, now all of a sudden you've got more range that you can, take advantage of. And also, there's charging at home too. Although again, not everyone can do that. Especially in rural communities where the infrastructure is not there, in terms of the grid. And I didn't mention that, but that's definitely another sort of piece of the puzzle. The grid is in pretty good shape, but there's obviously some gaps, some long-standing problems really that have gone on for well before the electric vehicles were around. But I think EVs have sort of brought these issues to the forefront in terms of having a robust electrical grid. Of course, solar, distributed solar would be a great solution for that. So, good question.
Excellent. I see John Luker has their hand up.
I just wanted to chime in about the Aptera. They claim 40 miles a day for a couple of reasons. The car is lightweight. They get rid of as much weight. It's very aerodynamic. It's only got 3 wheels, as mentioned before. So in some cases, they're say, well, this car may never need to be recharged ever, because if you can get, most people don't drive 40 miles a day. And anyway, just throwing that out.
Thanks, John. Larry Bright.
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure if this is a fair question or not. If anybody knows, whether or not the new ferrous phosphate technology is having much an effect on EVs and how expensive they are, how available they're going to be.
Lithium iron phosphate,
Yes,
LFP.
or lithium. Well, actually, it is lithium, but it's lithium iron phosphate.
Right. Charles, do you know? Whoops.
I wish that I knew more about battery technology. And that's kind of one of the things that I think I have sort of a deficit of learning. I will say that in general terms, the challenge with battery technology is basically you want the thing to be cheap as possible. You want it to charge as quickly as possible. You want the output to be, when you want to like go joyriding to be like super good. So there's a lot of expectations on what the battery performance is going to be, and so you have these different variations of lithium and other kinds of materials. There's also efforts to make batteries that are more easily recycled or that use components that are more easily obtained. When I say easier, in terms of both, just easier to get to, but also from an environmental standpoint, that they're not going to hurt the environment in the long run. So it's a very interesting situation where I feel like the demand is there for batteries. It's huge, and it's really driving the markets for all these materials. Whether that translates into more use of recycled materials, different kinds of battery configurations, that's still, I think, a story that's evolving right now.
Batteries is one of the, I was just going to say, batteries is one of the big issues for the world. So the engineers and chemists are working on, because it isn't just for cars, it's also for storage, for renewable, for solar, for wind, so it's a big deal.
But I know Tesla is now using, the new, lithium iron chemistry. But I'm just wondering if, anybody has heard anything more about how it's going. And evidently Ford has just said they're going to start using it as well. So I think the biggest piece of it, the environmental piece of it, is that it does remove the need for cobalt and nickel, which really are more of a problem environmentally than lithium. So anyway, that's encouraging.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I listened to a good podcast on this called Catalyst, which is a regular podcast, but on their April 21st episode, it was all about batteries, and I'll put that in the chat as well. But Catalyst is a good energy podcast. So I know William's had his hand up, and there's some questions in the chat as well. So William, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to follow up. I thought that Solar United Neighbors did a newsletter out on that lithium iron phosphate battery, and that the anode does not oxidize, so it can go much longer than the ordinary silicon batteries, and therefore it seems to me that it's cheaper to make, as you say. Cobalt and these other metals make the whole price of the batteries just much more expensive. If you can have silicon and an iron phosphate, it's a lot cheaper, it would seem. And that would be the technology. And as you say, the battery technology is the way to go in terms of having distance added to your vehicle. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right. And we're getting a bunch of questions in the chat. O'Neill mentioned that there's a great tool on your phone called PlugShare. I assume that's for EV charging, finding an EV charger. Christine asks if we're worried that the General Assembly will revoke Virginia's clean car status.
That's a good question. So there was an effort to revoke the clean car standards this year, and thankfully it was beaten back in the Senate. So I think it's a great illustration of the fact that your vote matters. And I can't stress that enough, that we need to hold on to this. The Democrats need to hold on to the Senate. If they don't be surprised. And they'll probably will try again. Any Republicans will probably try to revoke it again, or change the provisions of the Clean Car Standards law. I think there was one bill that just would have revoked it completely. The other one would have delayed the implementation for another 5 years. So neither one of which we can't afford to wait around. I mean, we know what the impact of Clean Car Standards are. There's no point in delaying it. So yes, it definitely concerns me, and I wouldn't be surprised if they try again next year. So it's going to be really important to kind of not only maintain the majority, but also try to maybe perhaps get the House back to the. I mean, I hate to put things like that, because this shouldn't be a partisan issue. We're talking about technology that is beneficial in a variety of ways. And so, and I know people who are both Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians who own EVs, but some people have decided to make it a partisan issue.
I was going to ask that, Charles. I mean, is it a partisan issue in terms of at least voting practice at the Virginia General Assembly, where it's just straight party line vote?
Yes. Well, I shouldn't say that. So the bill to protect access to charging in its original form actually passed both the House and the Senate on a bipartisan basis, which is really good. And there were some compromises made, in order to accomplish that, but that's the legislative process. So but then it got to the governor's desk, and he decided to amend the heck out of it. In that case, I think there was, I actually did that to a couple of other EV related and solar related bills as well. So, for whatever reason, the administration just is not into this stuff. I don't know why, so it doesn't have to be about a partisan issue. I think there's bills passed, the ones that I mentioned that were passed on a bipartisan basis. The total cost of ownership for fleets was also passed with not only just Democrats, but also Republicans voting for that too. So it depends on how you frame it. A lot of the times, I think, like if you say EVs pro-environment, they're going to make clean up our pollution. They're going to say, well, if you want to go spend your money on that technology, go right ahead. It's not the state's responsibility to subsidize or incentivize that in any way. But if you say things like, equal access to technology, that could be beneficial, especially lower income people who, less likely to be able to afford to buy a car that can save the money in the long run. Being able to have a rebate program to sort of equalize things would be significant. So it's a way. I think if you frame things the right way, you can actually get bipartisan support.
Great. And Lucinda has a question, wants to know if there's kind of a one-stop shop for all the different EV models. She can kind of go one by one through dealers and whatnot, but that's a really cumbersome process. Is there a clearinghouse of EVs, and especially I think in terms of availability in stock at dealerships, even if they're in Maryland or wherever?
So I know that, and I'll drop this into the chat in terms of, there's websites that you can compare different models to each other. It doesn't tell you like are those specific models available in your community. However, there is what I usually recommend to people is cars.com is a really good website because it has both new and used EVs, and you can actually has a filter on it, so you can like put in your zip code, and you can put a filter on it that says electric vehicles, and it will tell you all the ones that are in stock nearby where you are. So it's cars.com. But I'll drop a chat and a link in the chat for the comparison that I just mentioned.
Great. And Susan's had her hand up for a while. Susan.
Thanks. I just want to put in a little plug here for the public face that we put on here, because I'll tell you, we have, my husband has an electric vehicle. He has a VW that he loves. He charges it in the garage. He's not here right now because he decided to drive to Colorado just to test out Electrify America. He was happy with everything except Kansas. No tornadoes, just a lot of chargers that don't work. And I want to put in a little plug for my humble I know I'm slightly off topic. 5-year-old will be 5 in July, Prius. Okay. The battery, when I bought that car, there were 3 different Priusi, whatever they are, and they each had a different battery. And mine is a nickel something or other. Okay. So it's the old 20-year-old technology. I get 61.3 miles per gallon. I think pushing the public at this point, when people are truly in crisis over gas prices, they're buying these big old cars that they really believed they needed. I never did. I like little cars. And they're filling their tank with $100. That is life-changing for some people, especially if they live farther away, which is quite common at this point. I think we need all of us to be telling people there are electric cars out there that are the answer to your problem. There are hybrids of every kind. I certainly am not saying go buy a Prius. That's not the up-to-date model, but there are more hybrid models than ever before right now, just as there are so many EVs. And if you can couch it that they should check out a hybrid or an EV, that's the answer to their gas price problem. And once they switch, they're not going to go back. They're going to look at gas prices again the way I always have. My grandpa used to drive 30 miles. I know it was foolish, but he lived in rural Michigan, and he would figure out what the price of gas was and make phone calls if necessary, so he could save 10 cents a gallon. And that's how I was raised. I just don't believe in paying for gas. People are finding that out the hard way. Push them on checking out the options, because I don't think people really know how many options there are between used electric vehicles, which are shorter range but very cheap, and all the range of hybrids that are available now. So I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you.
Oh, and I want to add that, I always tell people that, my ideal world would be if every car on the road was at least a hybrid. So you can imagine how much less gas would be burned if we didn't have any cars on the road that didn't have, because I mean, that's 61 miles per gallon. I mean, that's amazing, and I think it sort of serves as sort of you sort of get used to it, and then you might go up to a plug-in hybrid and then to an all electric car. So I always tell people, just look at what your lifestyle is and how much you drive and that sort of thing. Because not everyone has to just jump and woofy and go all electric, because it may not necessarily be appropriate, but maybe a plug-in hybrid or a regular hybrid might do tricks.
Right.
So I'm glad you brought that
Hear
up.
about electric cars, they think of Tesla and only Tesla. And
Right.
that's just not accurate in 2022. Fortunately, we are really in a new world here with all the choices that are available. And people just who would never consider it just need to hear from us that there's a lot of options.
And Susan, you bring up a great point about paying for gas. And as a solar organization, I mean, Charles mentioned we all pay for electricity, right? And Dominion has announced intentions to raise prices 10%, because not only are fuel costs going up for automobiles, but natural gas costs are going up and fuel costs are going up for electric utilities. And so, charging your EV could be more expensive here pretty soon if these rates are approved at the State Corporation Commission. So again, as a solar organization, if you're fueling your car with the sunshine, the price of that is not going to go up. So always encourage folks to do that. I know we just have a few more minutes. There's a bunch of stuff in the chat with links, and thanks to everybody that's put up some YouTube videos and whatnot. Dwayne has a question on, do we know the status of the EV tax credit at the US Congress in DC?
We're still under the one that's been in place since about 2009, which means that GM and Tesla have used up all of their tax credits. Toyota is getting close, and they start to phase out. The Build Back Better bill had a component where those limits would go away, the credits would come back for everyone, and it would be a date rather than a number of units sold. So that's where we all know it is. Thank you, Joe Manchin, Kristen Cinema. So it still exists for everyone except, you don't get a tax credit if you buy a new Tesla or a GM vehicle, and Toyota's getting close to run out, and I think Nissan would be next because of their lease.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? It's $7,500 if the battery is above just a sort of minimal size, 16 kilowatt hours. The Prius Prime, by the way, there is a plug-in Prius. It has a small battery, so the tax credit is like 4,000 or 4,500 because it's under that limit. But with that difference, it costs no more than a regular Prius.
Good to know. Thanks, John. Well, with that, I know we're just about at time. So unless there's any final questions in the chat, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thanks to Charles. Thanks to John Baker with Drive Electric RVA. I know this has been recorded, and so Alexis, I imagine we'll be sending this out tomorrow or sometime this week. If you signed up or if you registered for this, and even if you had a friend that wasn't able to attend, they should be getting it as well if they registered. So thank you again, Charles. We really appreciate it. I certainly learned plenty tonight. And thanks everybody for joining. And we will see you next month in June, where we will be talking about lobbying our state representatives in the House and the Senate, and doing a little talking about community solar, access to solar for everybody, including folks that can't have it at their house or at their home. And we'll be kind of doing some lobbying training and getting folks out to meet their legislators this summer. So stay tuned for that. So with that, we'll keep you posted. Yeah, Dwayne will let you know if there's an update on the EV stuff, and certainly make sure you stay tuned to our email updates and whatnot. So again, thanks, Charles. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Time.